Fiat Panda diesel car, and they drive to Poland in December. Now, I don't know if you've ever driven in that part of the world. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, Mark. The Middle Europe is not a great place to be driving around at this time of year, but that's what they decide to do. So here's a picture, kind of a scene from what happens to them when they get into Poland. Eventually, they reached the small town of Belca. It was now 4 p.m. and the light was fading, and Leonard, tired from the day of driving, asked if they could just agree to stop here for the night. They found a guest house on the edge of the town and gladly took the one remaining room. It was large and cold with a huge double bed, but only a tiny window looking out on an interior courtyard full of broken farm implements, wrecked cars, all covered in gray snow. As Sarah did her best to navigate the bathroom's plumbing with its rusty handheld shower that kept coming loose from the tap, Leonard looked out the little window. He had serious doubts about this country of Chopin and Dobrzynsky, and he found it hard to believe that one of his 12-tone composition heroes, Kefler, had come from such a dreary place. As he tried to imagine what it would be like to play the cello in the pit band at the Grand Theater in Lodz, he watched his breath steam up on the window, and his thoughts went back to that bakery in Kensington Market where he had worked the summer before starting university. And when a string broke, you know what they used? He could still hear the keening combination of Yiddish and English in the old lady's voice, and it made this cold little country inn seem colder still. The next morning, breakfast came with the room: boiled eggs, stale bread, bitter coffee, foul garlic salami, warm pickles, all served buffet style on a greasy oilcloth table in the middle of a dim dining room. The inn owner's surly daughter, who the previous evening had slammed their passports down on the check-in counter with her only 2 words of English, "Welcome" and dollars, now filled in as the waitress. Her main duty was to stand guard by the buffet table to make sure no one pocketed any extra boiled eggs. Sarah and Leonard were the only patrons in the dining room, sitting in an uncomfortable table in the far corner, as far away as possible from the glaring daughter, who moved her eyes between the buffet table and a small black and white TV on the counter. Sarah wondered why, if they'd gotten the last room, there were no other guests at breakfast. But Leonard wasn't listening. He watched the Polish girl as she stared at the TV. It was a gray episode of Gunsmoke, dubbed into Polish, the sound distorted through the broken plastic of the TV's little speaker, and steam leaked out of the radiator and smelled like urine as it condensed on the frozen, dirty glass of the one small window in the dining room. And the scene could not have been more carefully set for the conversation that was about to take place between Sarah and Leonard. Talk that would unhinge this trip and send these 2 weary pilgrims on diverging arcs of intention and circumstance. So they split up. What happens? And Leonard winds up going back to Toronto and living in his mother's basement on Eglinton. And Sarah stays on in Venice. And to support herself, being that she's a flute player, she gets a job in one of the tourist orchestras. Now, I don't know if you know Venice, but there's a serious music scene. They have an opera company and a symphony and ballet. But they also have these kind of little fakey orchestras that play in the Piazza San Marco for the places that have the $14 glasses of champagne. And they just play mostly gag. So she gets a job in one of these. The flute work was mostly simple. What her professors back in Winnipeg had called, "Look at the dots, blow in the hole." It was an exercise of which she was entirely capable, and it could have become routine, except for the brilliance of some of the music she got to play. Of course, there was the vulgar and the mundane, the volare, and that whole catalog of Italian musical kitsch. But the power of the good music, especially the Mozart and the Verdi, always carried her away. More than once she missed an entrance, awash in a veil of emotions. Sarah became friends with Mariana, the Slovenian girl who played second violin and spoke English with earnest precision. Often they would go out for wine at some dead-end enoteca far away from the tourists after work. And after one especially good evening, they were sharing a half-liter of Merlot, when Mariana looked up from her glass with tears in her eyes and said, "I just love opera. It's so hopeful, especially Mozart. It sounds to me like he's praying for the good future of Europe. And you know, Sarah, that just makes me so sad." Sarah was surprised by this turn in the conversation and asked her why. And Mariana was weeping as she turned her glass in her fingers and said, "It didn't work." So that's my favorite passage of the book, because that's my wife. I wrote my wife into the story. My wife's Slovenian, her name's Milena. She doesn't play the viola, but she does speak with an earnest precision.